Hey there. Well, thanks very much for checking the YouTube channel. I do appreciate it. Right now we're on YouTube Live, so they're a studio feature, which essentially is just a quick and easy way to do a quick little recap of the week and kind of talk a little bit about Turo and go from there. So my idea basically down the road is to turn these little live sessions into actual content for a podcast. So that's kind of the idea there. So the video quality I know is not great. I'm using a PlayStation 3 webcam. So it kind of gives you an idea. And I'm using a little Blue Yeti mic. So we're talking the cheap of the cheap. And we're using the software that's actually provided by YouTube. So again, no real specialty stuff or no real expenses along there. I don't script anything and I don't do any real editing. So in other words, you're getting it basically as it is. So essentially, I'm going to assume you're here for Turo content and conversations from that end of it. So I do respond to, again, comments. I do appreciate it. I also really like it if you subscribe. That's great. A good thumbs up is also wonderful. And if you are a Turo host in Southern Ontario or perhaps Canada, I'd love to hear from you and kind of go with maybe you've been doing it for a little while or maybe you're new and you can say, hey, here's some of the things that have helped me. Down the road, I hope to get into a few more tutorials. Maybe a better finish style to it or a little more refined, but that'll come about if I find that I get more subscribers. So right now I'm sitting at about 270, I think 290 and around that range. So that's pretty impressive considering I've been doing it for about 4 months. So again, once I hit that 500 mark, I might look at it from the standpoint of maybe putting together a proper studio. Right now you're in my little laboratory, my little area of things that I like to play with. So I've got my 3D printer gear behind me and I do a little bit of artwork. I paint Canadiana. So kind of one of the things I do, plus I hold a full-time job. So again, Turo is a sideline for me or really more of an experiment than anything else. I watched some of the YouTube videos from some of the folks down in the States that run Turo. Now their business models are a little bit different. I kind of said, okay, I want to just dip my toe in and just kind of see what it's all about. So I went with what I thought was a pretty safe bet, a 7-passenger SUV. Up in my neck of the woods, we get 4 seasons, and winter can be pretty rough. I'm out in Atwood, Ontario, so I thought a nice SUV, 4-wheel drive, 7-passenger, puts it outside the realm of rental agencies a little bit. Normally, when you're going to a rental company, it's quite an upgrade to move into a 7-passenger, let alone whether or not one's available. Usually it'll be something along the lines of a GMC or a full-size Chevy, that type of deal, or a minivan. So I wanted to be a little bit different than that, so which is why I went with an Outlander. I went with the Outlander 2014 GT, and I worked with Mitsubishi for a few years. I'm very familiar with their product line, and this particular unit here is a little different. It doesn't use the CVT. And it's really, I think, brought a lot of components from their truck line. So you've got a 6-speed mechanical transmission. So it's got gears, which is nice. Got little paddle shifters to it, very much like a rally art. In fact, I think the steering wheel is from a rally art. Not that it's a performance vehicle, but it's kind of cool when you've been in and out of some of the cars, you kind of go, oh, I know where that's from and where that's from. It's got the aiming headlights, which I like. It's got a leather interior, heated seats. It's got a nice not the top end audio package from that era, but it's got the color display and it does Bluetooth and it's got the amp in the back and a nice sub. So it's a nicely equipped vehicle. It holds well on the road. I put a set of snow tires on it as well. So it's one of those things where I thought, well, this should be reasonably popular and be outside of that traditional rental car area, and maybe someone will pick it up. And so far, I've been relatively satisfied with kind of the results with it. It's gone out a couple 10-day loans. It's gone out on quite a few weekends. So it has had some utilization from that standpoint. I'm at the point where what Turo has paid out to me has essentially covered the cost of the taxes on that purchase. So it hasn't really dipped into the actual cost of the vehicle. So we haven't seen that kind of change. So I'm still working on that from that standpoint. My goal is to do 6 months and see where we're at from that area and kind of go whether or not I want to continue. Right. So that kind of gives you an idea. I just wanted to give it a try. So I figured that was a nice, easy, safe bet to go with. I bought the vehicle at what I thought was a fair market value, and it's one of those things where if I had to roll out of it, it might cost me a little bit of money, but it's not going to be the end of the world. So in that 6-month point, if I need to sell it or if I decide to hang on to it and continue with Turo, which so far I'm considering that, but again, it's not quite 6 months, but so far we're working well with that one. I bought a Chevy Cruze, and I found that the Chevy Cruze, um, some hurdles with it. So got it cleaned up, made it look really nice. It's a nice car. Did a intake system on it. Did a couple things related to the PCV valve and related to basic emission stuff. So again, regular maintenance. Kind of a nice rust-free car, midline package, LT1. So intermediate audio, leather-wrapped steering wheel, cloth interior, air conditioning, automatic, Windows cruise. So in other words, a comfortable, competent car. But when I looked at the reviews on Turo, as far as what that vehicle goes for, as far as on rental, and what it costs to insure, in other words, what it costs me to insure as a vehicle, it was one of those things where it would have to be out almost 30 days to be able to be at that point where I could say, hey, I've covered the insurance, I've covered the depreciation of the car, and I've covered the maintenance and the service end of it. And it was one of those things where I thought, well, I could run that for a year and see, or run that for 6 months and see. But it was at the point where I thought to myself, you know what, I can run it on Kijiji for free. We'll see if we can sell it. And I thought, well, if it doesn't sell, I'll just post it on Turo, and we'll recoup some of the costs from that and go from there. And I can drive a nice, clean Chevy Cruze if it's not out and about. And it'll be a nice little winter vehicle if needed, right? So that particular vehicle, got a fair offer on it on Kijiji, and I broke even essentially on it. I thought, okay, well, that kind of clings my hands. I'm out of it, nice and tidy from that standpoint. Looking at an insurance jump end of January on it, I thought, well, if I've got to pay 30% more for it, it's probably a good idea to get out of it. Not that I was worried about the car. I thought the car was in great shape. Passed safety with no issues. I had to do some brakes and some other things to it, but it was a nice, competent car. I thought it was very, very decent, nice local vehicle. So we're now just down to the Outlander, and the Outlander currently is out on a weekend rental, and it's gone up to Sudbury. So it's gone on a bit of a road trek. Now I put down, I think, 700 kilometers per day. So I don't basically charge for kilometers. It's one of those things where it's just it's a flat rate. You rent the car, and it's pretty straightforward. I do the automated pricing through Turo. The reason I do that is, as an inexperienced Turo host, I want to be relatively competitive, and I want to be able to get the vehicle booked out. So the value to me is on the volume, not necessarily on the daily rental. And when I'm looking at the daily rental charge out through Turo, I'm not that impressed with it, to be honest with you, on the Outlander. I think I don't know how to describe it. The numbers are really low in January. So it's one of those things where I scroll down. I got a little laptop set up here. Apologize, I'm not set up to do a screenshot or to tell you what's going on. So we're going to have to kind of do it verbally. So I do a little search. I'm doing Atwood, Ontario on Turo. And my little Mitsubishi comes up as kind of the first choice. And it's available for rent on a daily at about $50, right? So now the Mitsubishi Outlander, right beneath it, they've got like a Chrysler Pacifica, and it's at 81. And they've got a Mazda 3 at 58. They've got Mitsubishi RVR 2012 model, so a couple years older. It's not the GT, but it's still a nicely equipped vehicle. That's at $50. So I think that's kind of close. Jeep Patriot at 60, which I think is less of a vehicle because it doesn't have the third row, doesn't have all the gear to it, but it's got that Jeep look to it. There's a Lancer at $60. Caravan at 71. And a Mitsubishi Mirage at actually pretty close to what I charge. So do you want to rent a Mitsubishi Mirage, which is a nice economical car, tiny, or do you want to rent a full, well, not a full size, but a mid-size SUV in what I describe as Southern Ontario winter? So I think uncompetitive on pricing. If anything, I find that the automated pricing, and I think this might be the case, when you get into a Mitsubishi Outlander, the ES models or the midline models on them are a 5-passenger. They're not the 7-passenger. When you get into a midline model, you're into a 4-cylinder with a CVT, which makes it very close in relation to, at least performance-wise, a Hyundai Santa Fe. So I get into that Santa Fe pricing, and I get into some of the Kia pricing as far as that's concerned. I think my vehicle, because it is the V6 and because it is a 6-speed automatic transmission and it's all-wheel drive and it's got that leather interior in the third row, I thought it would be around what a Pathfinder would get, or what, see if we got it down here. Like a Toyota Sienna's up there. So my thoughts is it would be around that 65 to around that $75 booking and be quite popular at that. At $50, you know what? I'm not getting a lot of traffic, but I've had a 5-day booking in January. I've had a weekend out, another weekend out. So I'm coming up to 10, 15 days pretty good on that one. So it's averaging out as far as rental is concerned at the time. But man, that rental rate on the automated setup is killing me a little bit. And then I'm looking at it from a standpoint, I'm in the same position I was with that cruise. I'm looking at an insurance bump coming up. And it's one of those things where in that 6 months, which is coming pretty quick, I'm going to have to sit back, look at the numbers and go, well, is this worth the headache attached to it with Turo? The other one is I had a couple issues with their new review policy, which I think if you do a little research online, I think every Turo host is having an issue with this. So it's one of those things where I think it's a change with customer service, to be honest with you. I think it's right across the board, every industry. It's one of those little quirks that I think very few companies are good at anymore. I don't get a survey. No one has contacted me and said, hey, Keith, we're doing these reviews. What are the hot points for you as a host? And there just isn't anything in the way of that back and forth or community being driven. I think that's a problem. The other one is the way in which the reviews are set up. They're not really set up for describing a positive review, and they're more focused on what the experience was like, which I like, but they should be direct questions, and they should be pretty, in a range of 1 to 5. Where would you rate this? Or yes, no. And I think it should be a series of maybe 10 questions or 5 questions, and then you can kind of formulate where your review process would be from there. Now, I'm at the beginning stage, so my goal is not to get a 5-star rating. Like I'm trying, I'd love to have that, but right now I'm just trying to get bookings, and I'm trying to be consistent. I'm trying to make sure my paperwork is in order, making sure my photographs are done properly. So I'm just trying to get the process rolling. So this Outlander is really that test bed to see how good I can be with the platform. So far, I seem to be navigating okay, other than the fact that I find their calendar, which they've changed since I started, which I thought was weird. Like, why would you change the calendar? It is not as intuitive as the previous calendar was. And the previous calendar did a run for 30 days. This one shows you a run for about 2 weeks. So it's one of those things where you kind of looking to go just for the sheer convenience of it, to be able to say, okay, well, I can look at the full month instead of what's coming up in the week or the next week. I would prefer to see the full month, even if the last part of the month is empty, to be able to go, oh, well, I've got a holiday coming up there, so I'm probably going to have a booking, right? I can at least look on that calendar like it's a calendar and actually follow the dates. The other one is the pricing structure. Again, I think they've got it confused with the lower trim lines. And I think the GT is a little different. So again, it's one of those things where I probably have to go and manually change the pricing, which adds another layer of work to it. I look and kind of go, well, for that extra little bit of money that I'm going to charge, am I going to affect my booking rates, which aren't very high right now? So do I leave it low in January and kind of go, well, January, February typically tend to be a little slower, and just, I seem to get the 10-day bookings pretty regularly, which is nice. I think that's because the pricing's cheap. So a person looking to kind of go, well, if I go 10 days, I get a 15% discount on top of that. Plus, there's a Turo incentive program attached and a few other little things. So you kind of go, well, that brings that 10-day rental uh, to a very affordable price when you're comparing it to other cars. So a lot of folks will look at it and kind of go, is it worth the drive out to Atwood to grab it? And so far, most of my clients on those 10 days have been coming in from Kitchener or Waterloo. So it means they're driving 45 minutes to an hour out here to pick the vehicle up and then taking it for the 10 days. And I think that 45-minute to an hour runtime is acceptable if you're keeping the vehicle for a week or two. If you're reasonably local, I don't think you're going to take it for a 10-day program. That's falling right into actually what's happening. So most local folks, they're kind of in that 20 to 30-minute run are doing the weekends. And the folks that are doing the 10 days are typically coming in from a longer distance. And I've had it where they've dropped off their vehicle, which is fine. I'm okay with that. So they've dropped off their beater car, or had someone drop off they had a Mustang. So clearly they were taking the 7-passenger to run kids and do some errands. And then they were leaving the 2-door here. I just said, well, just park it where the Outlander is. That's fine. Not an issue from that standpoint. So that seems to be a pretty common item from there. So we've got an issue coming up with automated pricing. I find it to be a little bit on the lower end. I don't know if you're out there as a Turo host. Maybe you can help me out and say, hey, automated pricing works for you or it doesn't. I like automated systems, so I like to be able to just say, okay, I don't know any better. I don't want to do the research. There it is, right? So it's done. Insurance, still having a struggle with that. I have a local broker I've been dealing with. Haven't had any real response. The holidays were there, and I said, well, get back to me in January. And there hasn't been a phone call. So I may have to pick up the phone on Monday and say, hey, what are we doing? Where are we at? That type of deal. And in January, I'm looking at probably, well, in all likelihood, changing my broker. Again, issues with customer service. It's one of those things where you just shake your head. You kind of go, I used to deal with a standard broker agent and you just talk to them directly and everything would be done proper. Now this agent sold off to another company. The company took over and they're essentially a call center and they're brutal. So it's one of those things where you try and talk to them and it's either they're condescending, uninformed, or just frustrating really to deal with. And last conversation, I said, well, bump me up to a manager and we'll have a conversation with them because I'm not really difficult to deal with. It's just such a frustrating moment where you kind of go, wow, if I have to make a claim or do anything with them, it's going to be like pulling nails. So it'd be just grating. So it's one of those things where I look and kind of go, I want a nice little independent broker, someplace with a little office. You walk in. I'm not saying I want red carpet service or anything like that, but I just want to be able to say, okay, I have an issue. I can actually talk to somebody and they can work through it. Right. And I don't mind paying a little more for that. Like that's okay. You pay a premium for a premium service. That's great. When you're paying a premium for a service that you kind of go, there's lots of holes in it. You have to kind of ask yourself, well, why are you there? Right. And Ontario, yes, it's regulated. Yes, prices are essentially set. It's a conglomerate. So there's only really 4 companies you can deal with. So really the numbers don't change that much. So it's one of those things where you kind of look at, you kind of go to a mom and pop service and get proper attention. So that's where I'm headed to. Other thing is the reviews on Turo. Again, we mentioned they're changing up January 15th. A couple of hurdles I got with that is that most of my 10-day bookings or my longer bookings don't leave reviews. They tend to be, they're not Canadian. They're coming in from, I've had South America, I've had the UK, I've had Ukraine. So I've had an assortment of international driver's licenses come through. They typically don't leave a review at all. In fact, it's funny. They'll do a good conversation up front, which I like. And I'm okay with renting a car with an international driver's license. That doesn't bother me because I just call Turo and I get it verified and then ensure that the insurance is covered, right? So making a difference to me. I just look at it from the standpoint of if you're coming in from Alberta, it's another province. I just look at it from if you're coming in from Brazil, you got a Brazil driver's license. Roads are roads. You're probably okay driving up here. So it's not the hurdle. And I've had a couple clients tell me as they're kind of doing their little text messaging that they'd already been turned down by a couple of folks. And mainly the reason being is that they don't have a Canadian driver's license. So again, I don't think that's a struggling block for me. The issue that I've had, at least with, again, you're talking tourists, the review process. They just don't have any interest in leaving it. I'm almost certain. I have a couple that have sent me some really nice emails and said, thank you very much for, you know, allowing the use of the vehicle and not making the international driver's license a hurdle like everybody else has. So again, it's one of those things you look at. You're going to go, okay, get that from that standpoint. I also make sure things like ownership, insurance, peer-to-peer documentation is in place. So if they get pulled over, I also leave a little note in there to say, hey, there's a language barrier. Please give me a call with my cell number if they're getting pulled over along that line, so I can help bridge that gap. So it's one of those things that seems to help out a little bit. I did have one phone call, which was interesting, which was from a constable just doing a check. They were just they were traveling at night, and I guess open road. He just pulled over to see, if paperwork, documentation, and licenses were proper. And she had a struggling point with the international driver's license. So again, they weren't aware that if you're coming in, you can drive for a certain period of time on an internationally approved license, or a country that Canada has an umbrella with, or an agreement. And it works both ways. So if I said I'm going to go to Brazil, I'm going to go for a 2-week holiday, and I book a rental car, well, I don't have to get a Brazilian driver's license. I can use my Canadian one. It's perfectly fine from that standpoint. If I go to the UK, I can use my driver's license there too. So again, it's a trade-off. So not an issue as far as that's concerned. So again, that's where I've been at. Got a notice from Turo that it's time to do a vehicle inspection, which I find a little annoying. When I signed up, my understanding was that it was at the 6-month point that I'd be doing a vehicle inspection for Turo. And that puts me right almost at the tail end of winter. We'd be in end of March. So March, April kind of thing. And that's when tires get rotated. So I was going to do the inspection, or I had planned to do the inspection when we did the tire changeover. I figured if I'm going to pay for something, and I might as well have an added value to it. So if I take it to the local garage and they request a technician, that will do it. Like, they need a license tech number on it. So I can't do my inspection and just send them off photos and say, hey, here it is. There's 7 mils on the brakes and the rotors look great. Click, click. They don't accept that. So I've got to take it to a technician. Hourly rate here is, we're looking at about $100 to $145, depending on what shop I go to. So figure it's a 45-minute to a 30-minute charge out just to do the inspection. Now, if I do that with an oil change and a tire rotation, I can offset some of that time and kind of go, well, you're doing the oil change anyways. You're going to check the fluids. That's part of the inspection process for Turo. Scratch it off while you're doing it. You're rotating the tires out anyways, so measure the pads while you're doing it. So I can say, okay, well, that was part of that. And then there's a couple little things that wouldn't be traditionally part of a tire change or part of an oil change that would be billed out accordingly, right? So at least that was my thoughts on it. So it's one of those things where it's coming up relatively quickly. And that's one of those decision-making items where I might look at it and kind of go, well, do I pull off of Turo at that point? Because I've got to take it in for an inspection. There's a cost to that. So it's a cost that probably $100. Is it worth it at that point? I think it probably is, but it's one of those things where, do I just say, okay, I'm not going to rent my car until tire season is done, which means I would be off Turo I would just put it on hold for 4 weeks until I get around to doing tires. And that's probably what I might do. Again, just because the hassle of taking tires off and putting tires back on. And again, it's one of those things where I look at the list of inspection items. It's not that big of a deal, but it's one of those little irritants that you kind of go, well, you said 6 months in, and now you're telling me it's the 4.5. So you're sneaking a little extra cost in. And it's not going to Turo, but it's one of those things where you kind of go, you schedule for 6. You don't have a kilometer limit on it. If you said no, it's every 5,000 kilometers, or I would kind of go, okay, well, that makes sense. But it's just an annoying little quirk. And again, that's one of those things where if they had contacted me and said, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Or did a poll with the other Turo hosts and said, when's a good inspection time? I think everybody would say, because we're in Southern Ontario, most run snow tires. When we take the snow tires off, we're going to the shop anyways. Now you're double dipping. Essentially, I've got to go to the shop twice. And I find that mildly irritating. Other one is that they wanted to have dates on the battery and dates on the tires. So I just pass safety, so I know I'm going to be fine. But I never check the dates on the tires. I look for things like wear, cracking, belt separation, things that would be an issue with the safety. So the date on the tire doesn't necessarily mean the tire is done. It just means that the tire is at a certain timeline. If it's been in a shop or maintained and they're not dry weathered and they're not beaten to bits, and yeah, a tire can go beyond there. I think they want in 5 years. It's kind of like, okay, well, I'm okay with that. My tires, I think, are okay. I never even looked, to be honest with you. But typically, even when you're running a safety, they don't really look at the tire date. They're looking at dry rot, cracking, sidewall wear, percentage of tread left, whether or not the belt has shifted, bulges, things along that line. So just to arbitrarily fail a tire just because of the date is, in my mind, uninformed. So just one of those things. Same thing with the date and the battery. A battery, if it's properly maintained, can actually last the life of a vehicle. So you have an open cell battery, you can service it. There is no real expiry date on a battery per se. Now, if you buy a cheap battery, yes, 3 to 4 years in Southern Ontario. So if you buy a cheap bottom end battery, they're not going to last forever and they're sealed. You can't service them. But if you buy a premium battery and they have little caps at the top, you can service them. You can change out the fluid in it. You can clean it. You can recharge. You can do a whole host of things to keep that thing going. I've had a couple batteries in vehicles that have lasted over 12 years, mainly because they're serviceable. So again, but they're not the bargain basement battery. So I find that a little annoying. So it's one of those things where it's just based on assumptions. And again, I don't think anyone on the Turo staff, or I don't know why they went that route. It would be an interesting ask to say, well, what's the logic behind it? If it does pass an Ontario safety and a technician has gone over it and the tires are acceptable, based on that, because they don't check the date, they basically say it's based on wear, tear, damage, type of deal. So it's one of those things you kind of go, okay, that's fine. Fluid checks I get anyways, and it's one of those little items that you kind of go, I get it and I don't. It's one of those, I guess you had to agree to something, but again, it's just a mild irritant. So that's where we're at. We're coming up to an inspection for Turo, still dealing with insurance, reviews from international drivers. They don't seem to leave them. That's going to be a factor when they're looking at this new review process. If you don't get a review, they count it, I guess, as a 0 or a no star. So it brings down everything. So if you get, which I think I've got 5 stars or 4 somewhere in there, and I've got 2 unreviewed because they're just not here. Like they're gone. So again, that's going to bring me down probably to a 3.5 or 3, somewhere around that range, which I think level of expectation with clients is key. And I think Turo needs to separate a little bit. Like I think they need to say, okay, well, look, we do exotic cars. An exotic car, and you're paying a premium for it, should be a 5-star experience. There shouldn't be a flaw in the car. Tires should be perfect. It shouldn't have a ding, a scratch, a mark. There should be nothing, right? Should be a perfect example of that particular vehicle. That's just the nature of it, right? So if I'm renting a top-end Lincoln Navigator, and it's 1 year old, well, I'm anticipating that vehicle to be pretty straight, pretty clean. I might be using it for business. I might do a wedding run. Like I'm getting that one for a reason, right there. It's meant to be pin perfect, right? And that's expectation, right? When you move down a little bit, and it's kind of the way I like to say is, you got your 5-star restaurant, then you have McDonald's. McDonald's is McDonald's experience. you can't review a 5-star restaurant on the playing field with a McDonald's. It's not that McDonald's is bad or good, or the 5-star is bad or good. It's that they're two different categories, and to rate them on the same playing field isn't fair. You're either going to make a disadvantage to McDonald's, or you're going to have a disadvantage to the 5-star restaurant, because it can go both ways. Oh, well, they're $180 for a plate. McDonald's is under 20. McDonald's is better because it's under 20. See my point? Like that, it's one of those things you look at, you kind of go, oh, well, the food is better quality, the 5-star, fresher, better, brighter, handmade, better for you. McDonald's is a processed food. It's just boom, 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 boom. Yeah, but I have to sit for an hour to wait for my food. McDonald's does it in less than 5 minutes, right? You know what I mean? Like it's one of those flip things. You kind of go, well, which is the hot point button for that particular person? And I think they need to be able to say, look, we've got a bread and butter or a mainstay product. So if you're buying, well, if you're renting into a 5-year-old minivan, well, level expectation on that should be a 5-year-old minivan. Like it's going to have some bumps and scratches. It's going to have a little bit of wear in the interior. It's a 5-year-old minivan. So if I'm renting a 5-year-old Bentley and it's a wedding car, well, they're two different things, right? They're two different price points. So again, two different clients, two different needs, two different wants. It's one of those items where I think Turo needs to have Turo. It's called a 3 diamond or a red seal or a black car, something that distinguishes it as saying this is your upper tier experience. This is your upper end car. This is an enthusiast vehicle, that type of deal. When you're going to go and say, okay, well, this is a 7-passenger Outlander. This is a kid hauling machine to take them to the water park, go camping in, make a trip over the border, do a little bit of shopping. It's a car you can run through the blizzard. You can park it in a parking lot with no worries, right? I'm expecting a few little nicks and dings, and I've had one client do that, and it's like, yeah, that's the nature of it. And I set aside a little budget for a PVR, dent repair guy, to come in, and he does a couple little things, and I pay him, right? It's not a huge number, and I factor it in. So it's one of those things where you kind of go, okay, well, I think that's the issue with the reviews. So again, there should be a distinction between not necessarily the price point, but necessarily the category. And if you gave me the option, said, okay, this is the process. If you're an upper tiered car, and take appropriately, and expect that if you don't get a full 5-star review on it because you're presenting your car as a 5-star and a full experience, well, then I would be hard pressed to say, yeah, that's what I've agreed to. When you go, okay, well, I'm into a family, or what would be a fleet car, or your standard rental vehicle, has to have a few kilometers on it, has to have a few little nicks and dings, because the price is a quarter of what you'd be paying for the premium car, right? So it reflects in that. And I think you should be able to tick off and go, no, I'm part of that bread and butter, mainstay, fleet vehicles that are just turn the key and go, don't really affect much from that standpoint. But that's the idea, at least my thought. And again, Turo doesn't really give that feedback, so a little annoying from that standpoint. That's about it. So that's my little recap. Again, I try to keep this about 30 minutes, for a little bit over. I kind of go off and kind of all these little tantrum things, and kind of, it's just the nature of it. Again, no editing, general conversation. The next big thing I think we're going to talk about is doing that Turo inspection and just seeing how painful that is. And again, we're still working with the idea of getting into an insurance company. So we're still working on that. So thought I had it resolved, but apparently it's still an ongoing concern. Sold the Cruise, so we're down to one vehicle. I'm going to go out. I've got an automated system through ChatGTP that does shopping for me. It does little red flags. So it came up with a little red flag on a pickup truck. So I looked at Turo, a pretty good return as far as a pickup truck is concerned on a rental, especially for a vehicle that allows for work. The flashier vehicles, like the top end stuff, they made it very clear, don't move your fridge in it. Whereas if you've got a vehicle that is a work truck, with a bed liner, and you don't mind a couple little scratches and nicks and dings, and it's going to be used for a company or a service, or to move your kids' furniture out of the house to go to college. Like, what I mean? Like, it's going to be a truck, right? So as far as that's concerned. So it came up with a little red flag and said, hey, this is in your area, and it's at wholesale price. And then it shows the ad, and then it gives me a list of things that are potentially wrong with the vehicle, or potential. I've put a little thing in there to say, hey, these are some of the red flags to watch for. So this one came up with a couple little red flags. I didn't provide the VIN number. The guy didn't want to give a disclosure on loans. So it's one of those things where I think, based on that, the vehicle's been sitting for a while and the price is reasonable. But I'm going to go take a look at it, and it might be a nightmare. I don't know. It could be a decent truck. It might be a truck that needs a couple grand worth of work, which case I don't mind sitting on that till spring. If the price is right, I'll put it in the storage area, and I'll start locating parts and getting it to the point where I can throw it up on Turo, and maybe I'll rotate out and get rid of the Outlander and move into the pickup truck, and go from there. Again, it's just one of those things. I look at the value and kind of go, it'll be stable for about a year, as far as no depreciation attached to it, as far as what the pricing is concerned. So it's one of those things. Oh, look, have a peek. Did that last time. I ended up buying a Cruise. So again, out of the wheelhouse on what I was looking for, which was an RVR. But again, it's one of those things that the price is right, the vehicle's in good condition, it might make sense financially, and go from there. Again, it's just a play on Turo. I like trucks, so I haven't had one in a while. It'd be nice to be able to pick up a nice little Chevy and say, okay, I'm going to put some nice wheels on it, put some nice tires on it. It's a worky, so it doesn't, it's a white truck. So nice set of takeoffs. Maybe get the windows tinted. Put a nice little audio package in there. Throw a set of running boards on it. Just make it look prettier than what it is. I put cat skins on a couple of vehicles, which is a leather kit. So maybe I'll pick up a leather kit for the car, well, for the truck. And so it's got a nice rubber floor, nice black leather, air conditioning, cruise, the manual windows, because it's a work truck, but at least it'll look okay. And I think trucks hold their value up in this neck of the woods. And the rare item on it, it's a work truck with the shifter on the floor instead of the automated push button. And I like the shifter on the floor. They don't break. I've had a couple of them in the past, and other than lubricating the couple of points, they're almost bulletproof from that standpoint. And it's got the traditional GM transmission, and it's not that driveline where they turn off pistons. So it's just your standard engine. So it's one of those things where you look at, it's kind of almost bulletproof. It's like buying an older truck. There's really not much there to worry about. So again, we're going to take a look at that today and go from there. So I'm going to end it here because we're getting up to 38 minutes. Again, if you've got any questions, leave them in the chat section. Love it. Again, if you can subscribe, that would be great. And if you've managed to listen to the whole thing, thumbs up. You must really be enjoying Turo. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant and enjoyable day. Let's end the stream. And let's go end. There we go.